Welcome to One Work, 5 Questions with Donna Vitek and Dr. Mark Andrew Holowchak. Oh, and Jeffy.
Jeffy's always.
I have to add him to the slide.
You might as well. It's here all the time.
Oh, well, thank you for joining us, Dr. Holowchak.
Glad to be here.
Yes, me too, or we wouldn't have a show.
I guess that's right, yeah.
Today's topic is Thomas Jefferson to Benjamin Waterhouse, the 26th of June, 1822. Oh, what I'd give to just go back in time. I wish I could have been born during that time. Anyway.
5 minutes of living at that time, and you will be delighted that you're living when you live.
Really?
Especially on a cold winter day when you got to rush out to the house to go to the bathroom or something like that, or use a bedpan underneath your bed during the middle of the night.
Oh,
yes. It's
yeah,
okay.
I didn't think of that. Okay.
Are you ready to retract?
Yes, already.
Gotcha.
So to give you a little background on Dr. Holowchak, he is a retired professor with a PhD, and he's a professor of philosophy and history. He's taught at institutions such as University of Pittsburgh, University of Michigan, Rutgers University, Camden, Ohio University. Wow. What a CV you've got. He's the editor of the Journal of Thomas Jefferson and His Time, and the author editor of over 23 books on Thomas Jefferson. And we have a historical fiction in the works. I'm excited about that.
It's not in the works. It's done. And it may have a publisher soon.
Yes, that's what I mean. And the works are being published. And close to 155 essays on Jefferson. I highly encourage you to pick up Dr. Holowchak's book. It's twofold. You'll learn a lot about, well, threefold. You'll learn a lot about history. You'll learn a lot about philosophy, and you'll learn how to write well. I'm telling you, that's why my writing has improved just from reading your work. I truly believe your work has been a great influence on my writing ability.
Well, I call what I do, it's a term that's used already in history, but I use it. I call what I do sort of analytic history, because I don't go digging. I mean, I can do digging, but that's not essentially what I aim to do, what I like to do. I like to read what other people have said, or I like to read Jefferson and clear up the confusion that exists concerning, what scholars have to say, what Jefferson meant by this or that. And that's what we're doing in this 1 Work 5 Questions. We're practicing this, what I call analytic philosophies. We're looking at a work. We're trying to look very, very cleanly, carefully, and analytically at it and figure out what was he doing here?
Right. What was he thinking? What were his intentions? And that's one thing that we were just talking about, that I believe has helped you to understand him so well, is knowing your expertise in language and
in philosophy. Literally, having taught logic for over 30 years, and being an analytic philosopher. Analytic philosophers, look at language, look at the meanings of terms, and they try to clarify things. Whereas in the progressivist or revisionist history tradition, you look at words and you sort of deconstruct or try to figure out what meaning can we ascertain behind the literal meaning. That's what gets you into trouble. That's what gets you into trouble. So anyway, so much of that.
Yeah, see, it's always a college class with you. It's wonderful. So in our show, 1 Work 5 Questions, I'll ask Dr. Holowchak 5 questions on one work of Thomas Jefferson. And so I'm excited to talk about today. We have our picture of Benjamin Waterhouse. Well, that's big. Can you see it okay? Is it?
I sure can, yeah.
Oh, okay, because I have a really big monitor, so it's like this big on my screen. It's a little blurry.
Sorry, my monitor's not as big as yours.
Well, it's I'm old, I can't see well, so everything has to be big.
What's the old saying? Size really doesn't matter.
Well, it does when you have to see.
Maybe it does. Yes, I'm just teasing.
Oh gosh. Okay, so let's get.
And Jefferson's especially wedded to the principle that size doesn't matter. He's a little guy. So, but he's got a big heart. But okay, I'll let you go.
Oh, we need to just do a show on Jeffy one of these weeks. All about
We have a
Jeffy.
show on him every week.
Yeah. Okay, so to introduce you all to today's episode, in prior episodes, we have talked a little bit about Jefferson's religious views, and Dr. Holowchak noted that Jefferson was not particularly drawn to sectarian religions, though he befriended religionists, sometimes attended services, and read and recommended published sermons. This week, we turn to Thomas Jefferson's Unitarianism. So, are you ready for question number one?
I am more than ready, I hope.
I'm very curious. Who is Benjamin Waterhouse?
Well, he was a professor of medicine at Harvard. Harvard was the oldest, well, is, Jeffy wants to go down, is the oldest institution, academic institution of higher learning in the United States. And he was there, if I remember correctly, the first professor of medicine at Harvard. Now, how he and Jefferson got interested or came together in some sense is that he was, as a professor, as a medical doctor, he was very interested in Edward Jenner. Edward Jenner is the person who came up with the cowpox vaccine in England as a cure or preventative for smallpox. Remember, smallpox raged in Jefferson's day, and many people lost their lives. And so it was, in Philadelphia when Jefferson was in Philadelphia, when the government was in Philadelphia. And so to have a vaccine, and Jefferson, even though he wasn't super pro-medicine, because he thought a lot of the medical practitioners were quacks, because they were so wedded to theory that theory induced them to suggest cures and stuff when follow experience. He's an empiricist. Look, figure out what worked in the past, we'll know how to treat it. And so, but any of that, he was, that's how they came to know each other. And Jefferson had his family vaccine, he had many of his slaves vaccine and so forth. He was into that. That's how they got to know each other.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow, it sounds like Mr. Jefferson and I think alike in the medical aspect. Okay, question number two. Thomas Jefferson begins with 3 principles of Jesus. What are they?
Okay, we got to go to his letter here. He says the doctrines of Jesus are simple and tend all to the happiness of man. There is one only God, and he all perfect. That there is a future state of rewards and punishments, that to love God with all thy heart and thy neighbor as thyself is the sum of religion. Okay. And he talks about reforming the religion of the Jews. He's talking about, in other words, the Old Testament. So, I don't have to dwell too much on that, but the idea is that what Jesus taught, Jefferson did not accept everything.
Mm-hmm.
Jefferson, Jesus taught in some sense, there's some suggestion that he might have considered himself to have been inspired by God. Jefferson rejects the claim that Jesus thought he was the Son of God, but he does say he might have had inspiration by God. The same way Socrates, when you read Plato's dialogue, Socrates talks of his diamond, in his head. Whenever he says, whenever I'm about to do something bad, I hear a voice in my head. He calls it his diamond. Diamond, we get the word demon from, the devil, but diamond's just a lesser god.
Yeah.
In Greeks, it's just a god. I had some god in my head speak to me and tell, don't do it. So, so we get only one God. He's all perfect. I don't know whether Jefferson thought God was perfect. I suspect not, because of the imperfections in the world, but he thought God was just an unfathomable, powerful. Mm-hmm. There's a future state, rewards and punishments. I've shown in several of my books, the one you have on your table next to your impressive library there. Yes. Wow, I'd like to dig my hands into that. How come you never changed the books around?
I did. You don't notice? I was just going to say, I rearranged my books. You can't tell?
I didn't notice. I'm dusting, I guess. Okay. And then he says, so Jefferson didn't believe in a future state, rewards and punishments, and to love God with thy heart and thy neighbor as thyself is sum of religion. And I say in that booklet that you have there, that natural religion for Jefferson was equal to morality, that the principles of morality, and Jefferson did not believe that, part of what you needed to believe was a future state of rewards and punishments, but he did believe that you had to love God in some way and you had to love your neighbor. That's a sum of religion. And if I'm correct, it's the sum of morality as well. Naturalized religion equals morality. And if that's correct, there can't be a moral atheist, in spite of what a lot of scholars, Arthur Scher and other people say, because Jefferson talks of what of the moral atheist he mentions. Well, Jefferson doesn't mean a real moral atheist, because no atheist, if you don't believe in the existence of God, you're not seeing the cosmos the way it is. Jefferson says you can see God in the cosmos, and if you're not seeing that, there's something defective in your moral perception of things. So those are the three principles. Jefferson believing in one God, he agrees with Jesus. He doesn't agree there's a future, but he's not interested here in spelling out what he believes. He's spelling out what Jesus believes and what we should take from Jesus. Okay, I guess he's doing a bit of history here in his own way. If you read the Bible the right way, we see Jesus is committed to all three. Now, does that mean that is he enjoining us to think like Jesus and believe all three, believe in a future state? Not doing anything. He's just telling us what Jesus thought, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. Question number 3. What are the 5 demoralizing dogmas of Calvin, and why are they demoralizing?
Okay, you use demoralizing dogmas of Calvin. That's what he calls it, right? And okay, the second question, why are they demoralized? Well, there are 3 gods, right? There's the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Now, I was brought up as a Catholic to believe in the Trinity. Jefferson finds it unfathomable. It's inconsistent to say that there are, there's a Father, and then there's independently a Father, a different God, the Son, and a third God, the Holy Spirit. But in some sense, they're independent, but yet God comprises all 3. And Jefferson pulls out his hair and says, that makes no sense. So that good works or love of our neighbor are nothing. Again, that's one of the principles of Calvin. I'll explain in a bit. Faith is everything, and the more incomprehensible the proposition, the more merit in its faith. I don't think Calvin was committed to that. That's supposedly a doctrine of Tertullian, credo quia absurdum. Tertullian supposedly, whether he did or not, said, I believe because it's absurd. So I think Jefferson's drawing from, I don't know why Tertullian came to mind, but he did. I think he's drawing from Tertullian, the AD scholar of Calvin believed, Jefferson thinks some really incomprehensible things, but I don't think there's anything, I don't know enough about Calvin. I suspect there's nothing in his works that said the more incomprehensible, the more it is to be believed. That's from Tertullian. Okay, that reason in religion is of unlawful use. Come on, Jeff, get up. And, Tertullian, yeah, he wants you to buy things on faith. Jefferson's getting frisky. And forget reason. God, Calvin tells you just the way it is. And I'll explain after the 5th. He says that God, number 5, from the beginning, elected certain individuals to be saved and certain others to be damned, that no crimes of the former can damn them, no virtues of the latter. Now, this is the most incomprehensible claim of Calvinism, the notion that Calvin believed that certain people were foreordained, that God picked out certain people to be saved, and God picked out other people to be damned. No matter what, if you're on that saved list, you can, presumably, this is what Jefferson doesn't like about Calvinism. Calvin doesn't preach, go out and have a great time, get drunk, get high, go out and womanize, but he just says God picks out certain people, and presumably he picks out the virtuous. So God, because of God's wisdom, he's not going to pick out really weird, you know. But the idea is, if you really believe, if you're a Calvinist, you really believe that. That's why he calls it a demoralizing. What's the point of morality when it's preordained whether you're going to, you know, you're going to heaven, or you're going to be with God, or you're going to be damned to perdition? So he considers these to be, that's why he considers them to be demoralizing. Does that make sense? I mean,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
he really outstandingly hates the fatalism of Calvin, no matter what you do, right? Even if you're a good person, if you're not on the list, right? If you're not on Santa's nice list, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
And of
It does
course,
feel that way sometimes, though, that there's a certain group. I've mentioned that there's a certain group of people who everything seems to always fall right in line with them, and it's not necessarily the morally.
well, I would tell you that that's a perception.
Yeah.
You look at, you're probably talking about people who seem to be wealthy and everything, you know. But
Smart.
you know, one thing is having, well, you know, we have this misperception that when people have wealth, they're happier somehow. I really believe that wealthier people are less happy for several reasons. One of which is just that you can never know that the friends you make or the loves you have really care about you for the person you are, or just because you have stuff.
Right.
You can
Right.
buy stuff.
Mm.
And then secondly, I just think that people who have a lot of money are generally acquisitive. What I mean by that, they like to acquire.
Oh.
And someone who's acquisitive, notice the greatest minds in the history of the world are not, you know, in spite of what some people think, are not the billionaires, the multi-billionaires. They're the Isaac Newtons, and you know, and people like that, Albert Einstein, and other, you know, great men and female and male scientists and philosophers and thinkers, and humanitarian people as well. You can be a good and a important person, because Mother Teresa, for example, she was, you know, Catholic. I'm not a Catholic per se, but a lot of respect for the woman, because she, you know, she brought a smile to a lot of people from what she did every day. So
Right.
so much for that. I mean, those were the.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, question number 4. He speaks of Unitarianism as the religion of Jeffersonian Republicans. At least that is implied. In what way was Thomas Jefferson a Unitarian?
Now, in that little book you have in the shelf on back, I have a whole chapter in Jefferson's Unitarianism, and this is a very. I should write a short piece on it, you know, instead of the whole chapter. But people, when Jefferson talks about being a Unitarian, he says, "Here, I rejoice in this blessed country of free inquiry and belief, which has surrendered its creed and conscience to neither kings nor priests. Excuse me, the genuine doctrine of only one God is reviving, and I trust there is not a young man now living in the United States who will not die a Unitarian." Now, what is he saying about Unitarian here? He's saying Unitarian is belief in one God. Now, Unitarian is taken by people, it continues to be taken by people as a branch of religion, like Catholicism or baptism or whatever you want, Protestantism, Anglicanism. I suspect that's a bad way to look at it, because the Unitarians, in my book, in the chapter I cover, we have your buddy Benjamin Rush, right, who was a Unitarian. We have Richard Price. We have Joseph Priestley. We have Francis. Take back on Rush. Was Rush a Unitarian? I don't think he was. Hold on. So we have Priestley. We have Richard Price. We have Francis Adrian Vanderkamp. All were Unitarians. And when I studied, you know, I read what Price wrote. I read what Priestley wrote. I read what Vanderkamp wrote. These people disagreed prodigiously with each other.
Right.
I mean, in effect, you know, Unitarian was a view that came up in the late 16th century in Transylvania. What they did, they denied original sin, right? Because original sin means you're born bad. That just didn't seem rational. They denied the Trinity. Other than that, there's a lot of wiggle room, but they really believed you ought to embrace reason. Jefferson liked that. When you think about embrace reason, apply reason, you know, to the scriptures, and Jefferson does just that in a letter to Peter Carr, which we haven't talked of yet. He says, when he's telling his nephew, whom he adopts as a son when his dad died, he says, look, when you're thinking about does God exist or not, apply your reason. Read everything, read the Bible, read other works and stuff, and come up with your own view. Jefferson's got his own views. He refuses to tell his nephew what to think. Says, read all these things, apply, use the test of reason. He gets that from Unitarianism, but it's not a sound school with a very well delineated creed for belief. People believed all sorts of things. They were pretty much committed just that Trinitarianism was wrong. And in my book, that's what I argue. Jefferson's Unitarianism is not embrace of any one sectarian religion. It's just the acceptance of the falsity of Calvinism or Trinitarianism.
Okay.
Athanasianism. So he just thinks that this notion of three gods in one is ridiculous. And he embraces the use of reason too. So if you do those two things, there's a lot of, as I said, there's a lot of wiggle room for you to be a Unitarian.
Well, I would say, Mr. Jefferson, the Bible does say to lean not on your own understanding. So
yeah. Well, actually, I have a couple quotes. I just put some aside.
We are told that we're not supposed to rely on our basic human intellect.
Who told you that? Well, certain religions do, not other religions.
In the Bible, it says that.
Well, that's the Bible. You know what Jefferson thinks of the Bible? He thinks you salvage what you can from the life and morals of Jesus, and he doesn't have much positive to say about what's in. That's why he talks about Jesus. What does he say about Jesus reforming the religion of the views? He says that in this letter, because the Old Testament pretty much gets everything wrong. God is a vindictive, angry God and vengeful, and what Christianity is really about, what religion is about, is love of God and love of your fellow man. There's no room for anger. He doesn't think much of that. So the Bible as a complete work, I think he thinks very little of it. But anyway, I was going to say a couple quotes here I can read before we. He has it to Thomas Whitmore in 1822. He says, I've never permitted myself to mediate a specific creed. These formulas have been the bane and ruin of the Christian church. Again, I'm not wedded to any sectarian religion. Its own fatal invention through it so many ages made Christendom a slaughterhouse. To this very day divides it into castes inextinguishable hatred of one another. So the Christianity today, the way it's taught, it breeds hatred, and he's appealing to history and the Crusades, right? We're going to go a sweep of the Muslim people and kill. In the same year, he writes a little later. He says, "I confidently expect," he's writing to James Smith, "that the present generation will see Unitarianism become the general religion of the United States." So again, by general religion, I think he really means he's committed to simple principles of Jesus, naturalized religion, belief in one God, love that God, love your fellow human beings. That's it. That's what he wants. That's what he means by his Unitarianism. So all these scholars and just about everybody who writes on religion, I think, gets this wrong. That's why my book is surprisingly simple. Right? If you read all the passages where he talks of Unitarianism, he's not committed to any particular way of thinking on settling all these other issues, these metaphysical issues. I should add, by the way, before we go on, that Unitarianists, committed to there not being three gods in one. What's the status of Jesus? He can't be a God or son of a God. So Jesus has to be. So a lot of Unitarians really fretted mightily about what to do with Jesus because they thought him a remarkable person. Jefferson just says, well, he's a man. Others said, well, others might say, well, he was a man whom, as Priestley says, was empowered by God to do miracles. So he was a superman, but a man. He was a man who God thought so much of that he ascended to heaven while he was here. So Unitarians believed a lot of different things, a lot of different things.
Well, this makes me wonder what Thomas Jefferson thought about the ancient, the religions that developed in the ancient world, Confucianism and Buddhism and Hinduism. I wonder,
He
is there
doesn't.
any
He
way?
does not
He
talk
never
much. I
elaborates.
doubt that he had too much exposure to them. He knew of them. There's no question. He
Okay.
didn't think much, depending upon, he's interested in God. He's an Enlightenment thinker. He believes that the universe had to have been created. We can see it. Therefore, God exists. We know God exists. And beyond that, that's it. We don't know much. We know God exists. We know God has tremendously large powers and he created the universe. And other than that, when people, a lot of religions don't really even talk about a God. A lot of them believe in many gods. And I just,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, okay. Question number 5. Oh, this is always my sad question because it means we're at the end. Thomas Jefferson ends with some thoughts on the wisdom of the Quakers. Can you expand on that?
Yes, that's at the end of the letter somewhere. He says, no. Yeah, I should add that the Trinity thinks comes from Plato. I've talked to this before with you because Plato talks of the 3 parts of the soul, the intellect, the spirited part, courageous part, and then the appetites that make you, want to do all sorts of crazy things, follow your desire. And he thought there are 3 parts of a polis: the rulers, the protectors, the guardians, and then the laborers. So he breaks things up into 3s. And he literally thinks that's where the notion of God, the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, that's why he's always called Platonizers. I suspect he's correct there, that it does come from Plato, instead of some sort of metaphysical discovery about the true nature of the Godhead. Okay, but he says, how much wiser are the Quakers who, agreeing in the fundamental doctrines of the gospel, schismatize about no mysteries and keeping within the pale of common sense, suffer no speculative differences of opinion any more than of feature to impair the love of their brethren. Be this the wisdom of Unitarians, this the holy mantle which shall cover within its charitable circumference all who believe in one God and who love their neighbor. Again, what is he saying here? Remember I say surprisingly simple? All who believe in one God, second from the last sentence, and all who love their neighbor. That's what morality is. That's what true religion is. It's that simple. People go in and they take Jefferson's, what he says on religions, and they're breaking it all apart. They're always committed. It's this simple. This is what you get everywhere he talks about naturalized religion, which is morality. Love God, love your fellow human being. Notice at the end of here, he's not talking about life after death. He says in the letter to William Short, who was his secretary for a long time, that I don't follow Jesus in everything. He says he makes some claims that to me are outrageous, but he's also interested in understanding what Jesus thought. I mean, the wisest humans make mistakes of reasoning and thinking, and thought Jesus did, but he did still think Jesus was the wisest. So the Quakers were especially important because they didn't proselytize. They were required, they kept their religion. And they, from the research I've done on the Quakers over the years, I had to do some for my Lynchburg book, they prayed to God in their own way. They didn't need priests. That's what Jefferson likes about the Quakers. They had no they had no people in their community, no one person that was closer to God who had to be an intermediary between you and God. Right. And I know you're a religious person and you talk about your own spirituality being in your own way of communicating. And that's what Jefferson liked about the Quakers. I can communicate with my God in my own. I don't need a priest to do it.
Right.
I feel that way about political parties. I don't need a Republican Party or Democratic Party thinking for me, and then I just say, hey, I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican because everything they say is right. No, doesn't work. I can think for myself. So the Quakers, who only, you talk about general education, Jefferson's educational views, the Quakers were perfect examples of people generally educated. Basics of reading, writing, and arithmetic just to conduct their business, which what do most Quakers do? They farm.
Yeah.
So I think he had a tremendous respect for the Quakers, really do. Mennonites.
Yeah. Well, that was what he wanted us. He really wanted for the country, for everyone, didn't he?
To be farmers, yeah.
Yeah.
Or most of us to be farmers. I mean, people are going to have to create plows and other goods, clothes and items of manufacture.
Right.
But we don't need the fripperies. We don't need the gewgaws. I don't know
Right.
what those words mean either. We don't need the fine, expensive chariots or the, whatever, something elaborate things. So he just thought most of us would be rather simple. You talk about Monticello, how he was being hypocritical. I have argued that he was doing a lot for his wife, but he also wanted to make Monticello a museum of sorts that told the history of America's fight for liberty. I think Poplar Forest, if you go there, there's one letter from a granddaughter that says it was decorated simply, but handsomely. And I think that's how Jefferson was and who he was.
Okay.
What you see at Poplar Forest.
Oh, okay. So, I want to come to
And they love me at Poplar Forest as much as they love me at Monticello.
I think they're going to have a wing that's named after you there, aren't they?
I was thrown
or
out
a cell. I don't
Poplar
know.
Forest. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the idea is if you don't follow the narrative that Jefferson was a racist, a hypocrite, an overall really bad guy, if you have anything nice to say about him, you really don't get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's funny how these people who have never written anything on Jefferson, never really studied him carefully, but they just talk about what happened at Poplar Forest. And they're good at what they do, but they're in a position to refute me so categorically and other people who attack the revisionist narrative.
Yeah, I've had enough of that. I really have. It's I see how
it's frightening. It's frightening. And, look, extremism, whether from the left or the right, is not a healthy ideal.
Right.
Jefferson said that. He knew that.
Yeah. So, so our next episode, I'm excited about every episode, but especially this one. Thomas Jefferson, 1774 summary view of the rights of British America. So this was before we gained our independence. Can you give us a little teaser on what we can expect to learn from
and I'm excited because you're going to have to do some reading. Oh, that's a long piece.
You did that on purpose, didn't you?
No, I didn't. I mean, because I asked you what you were interested in. You said you always liked the American Revolution.
I love, that's
but
my favorite.
You need to read this thoroughly. Maybe you've read it, but you need to give it a thorough read. I keep reading it for year after year after year, and there's always something you miss.
Yeah,
it's very rich. So this is the nuclear warhead, to use today's terminology, that Jefferson drops, on Britain. He literally is attacking, and he's 31. He's born in 43, and he's 31 years old at the time. And he's telling the king how he's got to behave, what the duties of a king. And the king will get pissed when this gets generally published. Jefferson doesn't know it gets published, but it gets published, and he gets an enormous celebrity in the newly formed Continental Congress. And if you're familiar with the Declaration of Independence, for those viewers who are interested, you need to read this, and you need to pay attention for next week, because much of what he says in the Declaration draws right from the summary view of the rights of British America. So that'll be a fun one.
Yeah, I can't wait. I love the American Revolution. I don't know.
So you might want to call it next week, one work, 825 questions.
How am I going to contain it to 5 questions? I don't know.
Well, you do the best you can to get at the gist of what's going on. And remember that in doing good history, as I often say, you don't have to do everything, just do a little bit and do it thoroughly.
Yeah.
So if it's not thoroughly covered, which it won't be, we could cover the gist of it, insofar as we can, and try to do a really good job at that.
I think I can roll 3 questions into one, those questions like, and then.
You can, but that's dangerous too, because, just if we just focus on sort of a bird's eye view
Yeah.
with maybe 3 questions bird's eye, with a couple questions that just focus on something particular that captures your attention.
Yeah.
Well, why do you say that? This is, those particulars, as I told you before when you were writing, my advice is that good history and even good philosophy is taking on a little task and doing it better than anybody in the world's ever done it.
Yeah.
Little tasks and do it well. And that's what I mean by analytic philosophy or analytic history here as well. Is just, read something like this letter to Waterhouse and, get viewers and other people some insight to what's going on in a simple letter like this, right?
I just had a wonderful idea, since we're letting people know what next week's episode about. Those of you who are watching the show today, make sure you give us a like and subscribe. And for those of you who like and subscribe, if you want to submit a question, I can read the questions and pick some out of the questions to add to our show for next week. How does that sound?
And we'll mention your first name only, so you'll have
Yeah.
a sort of anonymity, even though not complete. So you'll get your name on
I'll make a slide.
I like the idea because it's a show and it's a document that anybody who professes to be a maven of Thomas Jefferson should know, and know relatively intimately. I really mean that.
Yeah. Oh, good. So, well, I'm looking forward to seeing what we get from our audience.
We're under budget. We're under budget. You know what I mean by that?
No.
We have time left.
We have a budget. Oh, yeah. Well, I kind of thought that's what you may have meant, but actually, we only have 1 minute and 23 seconds. So I do want to tell everyone how to contact you. That's important.
Okay.
You can reach Dr. Holowchak at mholowchak@hotmail.com. If do you have any books that you can sell, autographed books or anything that?
I always do if anybody wants to. I mean, I have my new book on Jefferson in France, and I've got other books coming up. We can, if you send me, you can see a list of my books that you have, and if anybody sends me a copy of a request for a book, I'll see if I have it.
Okay.
Some of them, if you go through Amazon or other Barnes and Noble, are egregiously expensive. I apologize for that, but it's beyond my control.
Okay, and if you have any show suggestions too, any of you that are watching, if there's a particular work of Thomas Jefferson you'd like for us to do a show, you can reach Dr. Holowchak at mholowchak@hotmail.com. And we're always open to having guest appearances on the show as well. My former classmate was our trial run, and I think that went really well. You can also reach Dr. Holowchak on his Facebook page, Thomas Jefferson, Bring Him Home to Monticello, Citizens for Change. Thank you so much, Dr. Holowchak, for sharing your expertise with us today.
You're welcome. It's time to go.